Man, tabletop RPGs just keep getting better and better every single year. We get awesome indie games, and obviously we got Dungeons & Dragons 2024 edition. That's not even including all the great blog posts, art, and just other multimedia that's been coming out for tabletop RPGs. So, what not a better way to celebrate the end of the year than to talk about my personal favorite tabletop RPG things and stuff of 2024. My categories will include 1. Creators and artists. 2. Articles, essays, literature, and podcasts. 3. Favorite tabletop RPGs, and also RPGs that I wanted to play. And finally, 4. Miscellaneous, which is anything that I really didn't think would be put into these categories, or I just forgot till the end. And just noting, these are tabletop RPG things and stuff I found during 2024. It's not always going to be stuff that came out during 2024 or articles or literature. It might be relevant in the year, but maybe the game came out in 2023 or earlier. With that, I'll highlight as many awesome games, content, and multimedia that I can think of in today's video. So, let's start off with our favorite tabletop RPG artists and creators. The first person that came to mind was Goblins Don't Wear Shirts. Artists like Goblins Don't Wear Shirts, I think, triggers 2 words specifically in my peanut brain: raunchy and personable. I know that might sound like a strange combo of words, but I say that because Goblins Don't Wear Shirts style has both of those overarching feelings to me. Their characters, despite many, but not all, being in black and white, have these expressive personalities, which doesn't feel OSR when characters can so easily die to the theme of high lethality. Yet Goblins' characters have that sort of cutesy art style, punchy, and personable. For instance, Goblins' work on D8 Weirdos to Meet has a wide variety of characters. You instantly get an idea of the kind of character you're talking to. Let's look at Mini Tamaron, or 3d6 Stacked Imps, or Clive Grog Blossom? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm trying my best here. When you look at these pieces, you can instantly tell what their personality is, removing the entire text as well. You don't need a lot of details or background information to know what these characters may or may not have done. Obviously, some might be harder than others, but there's a lot of personality in these simple pieces. Some of Goblin's work have these beautifully expressive dragons full of joy, while some show an array of mothership characters, each with contrasting personalities. And, in terms of raunchy, I think this art speaks for itself. And I can't exactly show these uncensored on YouTube, but I will have a link to all the art featured and mentioned, as well as the creatives in a master post in the description box. What I'm trying to say is that Goblins Don't Wear Shirts has a way of being raunchy, bombastic, and personable in a community that sometimes just feels overly gritty and hyper-realistic. It is a breath of fresh air to see this both on itch.io and Blue Sky. On that note of classic D&D, what makes the game so much fun is how our groups communicate and work through problems together. It's despite the lethality that we struggle, and that struggle create an awesome narrative. Even if my wizard dies in 1d4 blowing their nose damage. And when the wizard isn't blowing their nose, they're communicating with their fighter or the thief. And that's what Emil Boven's artwork really gives. There's a sense of community and collaboration. Emil is the creator of Durf, a rules-light dungeon fantasy RPG, similar to Knave, Troika, and Into the Odd. Emil is also the creator of the award-winning Electrum Archive, which is a science fantasy-inspired TTRPG design. While I have not had the money to get the Electrum Archives issues 1 or 2, I have had Dern on my periphery alongside seeing their art on the internet. For example, Emil's piece for their Rot RPG on Blue Sky are focused around what the group of adventurers are doing. It could be them resting for the night and having a good time despite all that lies in the darkness. Or it's the group barely scraping by a fight against some salamander creatures. Or my personal favorite, the gang is partying it up with a hookah smoking bear in a drunken stupor. Each of these pieces, while they might seem separate, give a sense of community, a sense of the party exploring, fighting dangers, being badasses and being silly and goofy. Yet, even in all of that, there is something tying these adventurers together. Gold, glory, beer, alcohol, whatever the case is, something ties them together, and that feeling of camaraderie is clearly there in Emil's work. And before I move on, I think my absolute favorite piece is this one. Look at it for a moment. This is just a bar, likely known as the Gin. Yet there's so much going on here when we look closely. Maybe you are playing a group of monks trying to talk to the bodyguard guarding the owner of this fine establishment. You could be playing a solo game and be a debonair poet professing about death and life to a plastic skull of all things by yourself. You also could be a group of musically inclined adventurers who want to get famous for their music. Maybe that's your dream, and Gin is a great place to make some coin and put on a good show. What if, though, instead of being the ones playing the music, you were the ones dancing? Well, whether you are or not, you're bringing the life to the party with your wicked dance moves. And my personal favorite is the green fella jiving in the middle. I mean, just come on, look at them. They're so cool. You could also be playing a more evil campaign or a more chaotic campaign. Your group, thought rather than to be suspiciously outside in the middle of the forest, are instead conducting magical experiments using what is totally not blood in this crowded bar. Good thing no one said anything. And that's why I love this piece so much. There are so many different stories in this one picture, and that interpretation reminds me that OSR games can tell so many various stories despite all sharing the same similar DNA. It could be comedic, or it could be deadly, it could be a chaotic evil campaign, or you could be playing a solo RPG. I really do think Emil's artwork gives a sense of camaraderie and colorfulness in the OSR genre, when sometimes it can feel gritty and dark and kinda sad. Yet, I'm sure some people would like to have that classic style of Dungeons & Dragons. I'm talking about D&D Mulvad or BX D&D art. One thing that does give me a lot of joy is looking at this old artwork. There's something amateurish about it. It gives a sense of you're watching people develop their craft in real time as you look through each of the books progressively, say from BX D&D all the way to the latest edition. Watching an artist get better over progressive time is heartwarming and beautiful, to say the least. And it's hard for me to imagine someone capturing that old school style of art. Well, color me surprised when I found out about Hodag RPG. Hodag's work feels realistic and gritty with its line work. Many of the humanoid creatures maintain some semblance of humanoid-like features, while standing out due to the clear detail of the line work. Best part, Hodag has a range of projects, from sci-fi RPGs to post-apocalyptic Mad Max worlds, or projects using classic D&D, or classic fantasy, or basic Dungeons & Dragons. And yet, this artist does not scurry away from modern inspiration. One project has me floored, and I found it randomly. What if there's someone who combined BX Dungeons & Dragons with classic Pokemon? And I'll be honest, if you sat me in an office or in a library and said, "Blurty, this could never be done," I would agree, but I stand queer and very incorrect because, gosh dang it, this artist did it. Hodag did a challenge throughout October, which combined the bestiary writing of BX with art about specific Pokemon from the Kanto region. There are right now 31 entries, and there are creatures like Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Charmander, to name a few. They each captured the Pokemon's essence while having a flair of BX D&D or old school Dungeons & Dragons. That is wicked. I don't know any artist is capturing Pokemon in old school Dungeons & Dragons in that fashion. And my personal favorite is Mewtwo. Just look at them. Look at this art. Look at this aura. To some, it might just be a simple rendition of Mewtwo, but for me, as someone who enjoys OSR games, as, it's my hobby, Just looking at this line work clearly shows like that aura, that presence. You know Mewtwo is a badass. It's just so cool. Come on. Just look at it. Anyhow, what I'm trying to say is that Hodak's art captures just that classic D&D feel done professionally. And I love seeing that work on my page anytime I get a chance. Moving away from artists, let's go on to podcasts, actual plays, or creatives that I had the pleasure of watching, being part of, or ones that just caught my mind. Rough Magics was one of the groups that I worked with this past year. I so rarely get to work with other podcasts or things like that, so when I do get the chance, it's always a blast. And specifically, I worked with Rough Magic Games back in October as part of a podcast talking about Mouse Ridder's game and the community. Rough Magic Games now is a Chicago-based tabletop RPG company aimed at running games from campaigns to one-shots using various systems. Charlotte reached out to me to talk about my experiences playing and running Mouse Ridder, as well as just my experience writing my video on Mouse Ridder. And it was an absolute blast getting to be on the show. We bonded over the combo of cute aesthetics and brutal gameplay that is Mouse Ridder. We talked in extensive detail on the mechanics of the game, as well as the wide amount of supplemental materials that existed out there. And it was awesome. If you are looking to get into Mouse Ridder or OSR games and support a growing Chicago tabletop business, then I say go and check out the podcast episode as well as their channel in the description box. Another thing, I also haven't been on any actual plays. Well, that changed this year. As I was looking for more opportunities, I got the chance to work with BIPOC Vamp Day. BIPOC Vamp Day was and is an online event showcasing BIPOC, game masters and players playing and running various games for charity. The focus, as you could assume, was on vampires, and the stream's end goal was to raise money as part of September being Sickle Cell Awareness Month. And this collaborative effort also included a charity design as another aspect to help raise funds. Between everyone else's streams and design, we collected over $2,169 for the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America, and that was a deeply profound moment. To be part of something bigger than you and contribute to it by streaming was a new experience as a PNG tabletop tuber. And yes, I'm claiming that terminology for myself. On top of that, there was a great networking experience with some awesome creatives that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't applied. So, for anyone in the year 2025, if you are looking to get into actual plays of any kind, the best place to start is just to reach out. If you are interested in working with BIPOC Vamps in the future, the newsletter, our stream, and the various other amazing streams will be down below in the description box. Finally, I really just have to say, to the gamers in my session of Anthel_10N, Mech, Ariana, and Misha's voice, thank you so much for playing with me. It was so much fun, and I would gladly do it again. Now, there are some moments where I don't actually listen to actual plays. In fact, I don't usually listen to them at all. But you know I love Call of Cthulhu. It's probably one of my favorite tabletop RPGs. I kind of am a fan of many horror games, if you couldn't already tell. Nevertheless, I just don't watch a lot of actual plays of Call of Cthulhu, ever. Well, remember when Graveyards of Arkham came out early in the year? This series blew my mind. It's one of the few actual plays that isn't like Critical Role, that I don't watch, mind you, that got me so hooked and just intrigued in the characters. It is only 6 episodes, and each of them are just punchy, back-to-back, emotional goodness. To start, the series and its cast had me on hook. In an interview with some of the cast, one of them mentioned it was a twisted, feminist Cthulhu tale, and I lived for every moment of this 6-episode series. I think what made the tension so meaningful for me was how Mark Meir leaned to the characters' weaknesses and pasts to further the horror and suspense. Obviously, all of these players are actors in some kind, and this is a professionally done set sponsored by Roll20 and a crew of other talented folks. Plus, it got a Kickstarter and it did very well. Also, it had the support of Chaosium and a new book that Chaosium released called Arkham. With all that in mind, it's obviously that this would have succeeded, but just the production level was absolutely phenomenal, and how they crafted each character was just, oh God, you just have to watch it. You just have to watch it. My other favorite actual play of the year has to be the fiercely trans and queer God Killer Last Hope by Transplanter. I at one point had notes on the series, but they're lost. I don't know where I put them either, but that's not the point. What is the point is that this show is just the art direction, the way Connie and C interact with each other is just phenomenal. To start, one thing I love is how Litany and Tian Sheng's relationship gets closer and closer throughout the episodes, especially after episodes 4 to 5, when they start to get closer and they meet the people of New Mudan Village. Secondly, I think the moment Lenny opens up to their divinity is glorious. That transition for Zoe Williams to play Prince Wu was masterful. The entire segment of Prince Wu seeing the battlefield, seeing their men struggling and dying, and then facing off against the general was peak cinema. I just think every story beat had a purpose, and it felt like I was indeed watching a story of vengeance and queer devotion, as the title states. Above all, I'm watching the main character Litany discover who they are and learn that Litany is more than just a vessel or a weapon. Litany is taking ownership and claim over who they are as a person, and that looks messy, that looks queer, heroic, cool, and so many other adjectives I can't even think of. So the fact that it's centered on an 8-episode series was just a perfect choice. I don't think I can do it justice, so I'm going to quote M. Friedman, who writes about God Killer Last Hope, summarizing the experience watching it. God Killer is actual play in operatic style, in keeping with the rest of Transplanter's commitment to passionate intensity. Transplanter often reminds of the 19th century theater's taste of melodrama, designed to move the emotions through performances that can reach all the way to the cheap seats. God Killer is more refined and quietly intense, but released from the constraint of remote performance styles. The effect is now black box theater, experimental, full of ideas, and definitely polarizing. Like abstract art or molecular gastronomy, God Killer isn't for everyone. For those it has touched, it is indelible. And it is in part why this sounds crazy, but I've been waiting to watch the final episode. Probably after this video is released, I've watched episode 8, and you will likely see my response on Blue Sky or in the YouTube community section. Next, let's talk about articles, essays, literature, and podcasts. Things that I might not have been a part of directly, or things I just read that I believe need to be talked about. First off is Skeleton Code Machines, How Fragile is Your Game Design? Fragility is defined as the unspoken and unwritten guidelines to a game that are not tied to any specific win condition, but if players do not opt into said decision, it can break the game entirely. For example, SCM uses social deduction games and open world tabletop RPGs as a solid example. I'll read out both of them. Social deduction games like Battlestar Galactica, the board game, or The Resistance in 2009, and other social deduction games rely on players lying, bluffing, and negotiating during the game. While the rules never explicitly say you must lie this percent of time, if players always tell the truth, the game will fall apart. Open world tabletop RPGs. The implicit expectation of most tabletop role-playing games is that players will actively engage with the world and make meaningful choices. As with the example of the horror tabletop RPG above, aka the game that is the focus of Skeleton Code Machines article, players are expected to leave the starting room and go explore. Dungeons & Dragons is a very different game than intended if the players never accept quests, never explore, and just instead decide to spend their days fishing in a safe location. Fragility, if I'm interpreting it, is testing the game and the validity for which it stands on. A good example is my current HOT campaign. If the players choose not to get on the Orient Express or choose to not investigate the horror, then there is no adventure, there is no module, and there is no scenario. SCM has some great suggestions on what to do from a game designer perspective, as well as invites us to consider how fragility is not a positive or negative distinction for any game. It's built in, and GMs, players, and designers need to address that when it comes up. I also recently got into this lovely podcast called Talk of the Table from Many Side Media. This podcast is a tabletop RPG talk show where the hosts sit down with game designers, actual play producers, journalists, academics, artists, performers, and etc. to discuss all the coolest things in the TTRPG community. And the series really pulls from a large swath of creators in the industry. Johan Noor, who is the illustrator and graphic designer of Morkborg and Into the Odd, Quinn's Quest and his work around gaming journalism, Rowan Zioli, a TTRPG journalist who writes for Rascal, and Polygon, and also my colleague and internet friend A.A. Void was also on the podcast. Yet, the one that stood out most in 2024 was Elliot and Brian's interview with Jay Dragon about Yaziba's Bed and Breakfast. The 5-year production of the game and how Jay Dragon wants folks to disagree with the game and the way to approach games in general. Around the 37-minute mark, Jay Dragon mentions how games are like monkey bars. A game is more interesting when it's not about dictating this or that for the player, implying that games and how we should approach them are up to us. The game designer just gives us the reins to do that. aka, the monkey bars are for us to decide how we want to play with them. Jay Dragon wants to provide players with the option to see the problems that characters have and approach those problems however which way they like. The other conversation was about the ethics of game development as well as the weight that creating with a team involves people's livelihoods and well-beings. One of those options is to, as Jay Dragon puts it, keep growing and become a CEO of Possum Creeks. That could mean franchising deals and sponsorships, but also failure could mean breaking promises with your creatives and the people that are relying on your product. It was a scary conversation as I sat there absorbing the information. And for me, that podcast stood out because there isn't a single day I, as a creative, who, mind you, this is all a one gay show. There's no one else helping me. Obviously, I'm relying on internet and the support of my internet friends, my TTRPG friends, and my colleagues for reading lines, editing support, and other things on occasion, but this is all just me doing this. If I were to go full-time, I would likely hire an editor, and I would enjoy sponsorship. But there are ethical and practical questions to that. Will the sponsorship be from a company that I value and my viewers value? Am I selling myself out to a company for money? Who, in the process of growing bigger, franchising, gaining more followers, and expanding, has to get paid less or work more? That's not even talking about how I will need to navigate professional spaces, especially someone who's quite clear about my politics and stances on issues. As you can see, I think about this stuff a lot. And that episode and conversation just sits with me in a way that none of the other episodes has. It's beautifully haunting and just generally a great conversation to listen into. So I say go check out Talk of the Table and specifically Jay Dragon's episode. While that existential question of dread and franchising sits in my brain, why don't we talk about old school play and old school gaming? Because, why not avoid my problems? So, you ever thought about how old school play involves puzzles or, well, a lack of them? I know for some of us, puzzles are the last thing we want in our games, old school or traditional. They can slow down the game when you include statistics, tactical combat, and grids. It gets super bloated. Good thing, Clayton Notestein from Explorers Design talks about their design philosophy on making combat as a puzzle. Obviously, puzzle is a bit abstract. Notestein states, "In my game, I want the combat to end as soon as you solve the puzzle. The puzzle is the encounter, and how the players and subsequently the characters are going to overcome this issue is part of the narrative. Notestein, I think, touches on a struggle some have in encounters in OSR games, but also in traditional games. We want dynamic problem solving that can involve failure and not need such large swatch of number crunching, unless there is something that needs that in your game. So to do this, we, aka Notestein, presents lore and the armor, quote unquote, what is protecting the boss of the monster, to the players immediately. The idea is brilliant. Just simply telling your players what is needed from you and just telling them what is upfront helps a great deal. Players need as much info as possible that isn't game breaking or that seems too jarring, while also making sure that communication isn't what they're battling. The puzzle in question should be how players respond to the combat, respond to the dangerous trap, respond to the encounter. As long as you paint out what is clear, the armor, the defenses, the issues, the players will respond accordingly. On the topic of OSR games, tangentially, Playful Void wrote a delightful article on what is an OSR game. Void's approach is interesting for me because it clusters various games together due to each of them sharing enough features. They feature this wicked cluster plot that was originally created in 2022 by Marcia B. in the blog Traverse Fantasy. The biggest point, though, is while there are plenty of OSR games and they share broad categorizations, there are distinctions that group them into specific handles of games. Maria and Playful Void mentioned that there are 6 cluster types of rules. There is Faithfuls, Moderns, Blacks, which is really interesting categorization, Odds, Knaves, and Baroques. I'm not going to get into the details of each of them since this isn't the point of the video, but I really recommend checking it out if you are an OSR aficionado, a nerd, or just someone who likes game design. And since we are in the holiday season, if you want your RPG designer or creative or friend to thrive, why not give them an awesome gift? In the Explore Design article, 2024 Gifts for RPG Designers, Clayton lists 5 things that gamers will need. 1. Run the designer's game. 2. Rate their games on DriveThruRPG, itch.io, or wherever. 3. Share their work on social media, Discord, word of mouth, doesn't matter. 4. Write about them. That could be a review, a walkthrough, or whatever. And 5th, design for them. That means make illustrations or character portraits from your last session. You could make a character keeper for the game, or maybe a supplement or adventure. For a lot of us creatives, whether you write news articles, create blog posts, or make YouTube videos, it is largely out of a passion and joy for the craft. I don't have data on this, but I don't think most of us are making big bucks off of tabletop role-playing games. So, go support your fellow artists or designers. Share, comment, rate, or create fan art. It generally means the world to us, and I'm sure for many others. Favorite RPGs of 2024. I played a lot of games, and I mean, my list for games is here. Yeah, there's a lot. So instead, I'll just do my due diligence and just choose 5 games that stuck with me. Astroprisma is a science fiction RPG set in a post-apocalyptic and retroistic future. The past of civilization has faded and knowledge of advanced technology has been lost. In Astroprisma, you play the role of a spacefarer journeying through a new star system, keeping record of your experiences and charting out your path in a dangerous vastness of space. Originally, I backed Astroprisma earlier in the year or before that, since the art looked absolutely stellar and I was looking for a nifty solo RPG to play. In fact, when the game was released to the backers around August 15, 2024, that's how I engaged with the game. And I think As Written, the game was phenomenal as a solo role-playing game about exploration. The steps to play this game solo are written clearly on the 4th page. This assumes you have created your starship, by the way. You move your starship 1 hex and mark 1 fuel used, fuel being the main resource for our starship. You explore the location you found and roll a d6 for exploration roll to generate a location or encounter. From there, you follow the procedures, and then you mark your results. That means draw your findings in the map and rinse and repeat until you explore the entire hex. And that cycle, you might think, sounds boring. It would get stale after a while just to explore hex, roll a few tables, and then rinse and repeat. Yet, I stand incorrect. Astroprisma blows my nerdy purple self out of the water due to the just wide depth that every part of character creation, starship creation, and exploration have to offer. For instance, you can pick, or in my preference, roll for character origin. When I first played, I played the badass Chrome Skin. The Chrome Skin is a human cybernetic powerhouse. As stated, the human body is a canvas. The scientific and technological advances made in the old world have rendered our anatomy obsolete and primitive. Your goal is the one: to transcend humanity and to reach the limits of cyber technology. So once you have your explorer, you need to create a starship. The game leans to the tactical. Here, you choose specific pieces for your ship out the given options and draw them on the grid. You can of course print out the pieces and put them together, draw out what you have, or what I just did, write out what I had and use theater of mind because I didn't want to do all that drawing. Once you have your ship and you explore, it's time to get, well, exploring. The game has rules and player advice for exploring too. And with exploration comes tables. There's tables for the outer ring, middle ring, and inner ring. And from there, if you roll an encounter, there are tables for specific encounters, and then specific scenarios have tables. There are tables for multiple factions that are all vying for political, economic, and social control too. And these particular factions will give you scenarios that you won't get anywhere else. And if you aren't exploring the factions, you're exploring the various planets or celestial bodies that exist. From the Ecumenopolis to the asteroids, there are just a number of places to explore. And my friends, that does not count the expanded content like campaign mode and rules for multiplayer, or the addition of a page of quick rules. Seriously, this game, beyond its style, is super competent while giving more than enough tables and flexibility for players to carve out their journey in a dangerous and hostile world. That is space. But not all explorers want to fight off stupid space cops or cultists who bootlick for NB Lord Cybertech. Some want to explore the beauty of corporate greed, late-stage capitalism, and totally fun time on an island. Well, my favorite lovers of a 9 to 5, Deathmatch Island is servicing deadly competition and mystery all in one setting. Deathmatch Island is by Old Dog Games at Evil Hat Productions, and in it, you play a competitor recruited into a deadly series of games for a vague promise of some big reward. Deathmatch Island is all about simple characters and mechanics, but having punchy locations that push the narrative with action around every corner. For players, you play everyday people who have been drawn into a strange death game and have to compete in order to survive. Your character is defined by their past occupation, which determine their capabilities. For instance, River Snow in the book is a jazz musician. The occupation affects their capabilities, giving them social game as their main capability from occupation, and all capabilities, excluding one, are a D6. The last one is a D8 of the player's choosing, and that capability is favored, meaning what they are particularly good at. I emphasize this because that's mainly how you roll in this game. The GM asks you how you want to respond to the problem, and you use your dice pool for a given situation to roll over the production player's roll. The real drama and juiciness is in two things though. Firstly, it's the game's style. The game oozes a clinical corporate art style. Deathmatch Island is 50s/60s clinical Swiss modern that contrast a pseudo-friendly tone with a bleak aesthetic from the start. That idea is furthered in how the game gives out a lot of lore, contradictory information, and downright delightful hostility in the book. Examples being here and here. Next, the interpersonal drama is what defines this death game. And I think that's what defines any death game or survival manga product or franchise. The drama is knowing that you can't really trust anyone. It's the paranoia. It's characters who are struggling to stay human in a situation that's terrible, where poor and impoverished people are put at each other's necks. Deathmatch Island is 100% on my list to run more in 2025 simply because of how it exceeds at capturing the survival deathmatch genre in TTRPG format. While fighting for your life in a deathmatch is exciting and absolutely terrifying, exploring Gonzo fantasy sounds even more thrilling and probably less deadly. Distorted Domains is a Gonzo fantasy role-playing game for 2 or more players. Distorted Domains is maintained by Transcendent to Peer, a queer game dev cooperative, and is specifically being written by my friend Penny in TTRPG Academy. While the previous games have been super serious, dark, or downright deadly, Distorted Domains sits on the opposite end. This is meant to be silly, weird, and funny, as is a Gonzo science fantasy likely going to be. The game is about people traveling through domains in search of someone or something and the journey that changes them, for good or worse. The dice for the game is a dice pool, which you assemble a player pool and an opposition pool. You can start with the most relevant stat or approach, then add dice that are appropriate, maybe say an asset to those pools. Likewise, the narrator selects the harm die that match the player's stat, as well as negative traits and other factors that might be relevant to the narrative. Then you roll the pools and see which one is higher and which one is lower. If the players beat the opposing force, then they succeed, and the players are lower than the opposition, then they fail. Crits are if the difference is 5 or more, and ties are succeeding at a cost. For me, what stuck with me all these months later after playing are 2 things. 1, it's the various ways to receive harm. When travelers are quote-unquote incapacitated, after their harm die is raised to d12, they can roll for negative aspects. These aspects are generated from what harmed the traveler, obviously. What makes this so much more fun is that there is enough flexibility for harm to not just mean physical harm, like getting hit in the leg or chest or arm. Harm could mean a magic spell going terribly wrong. Maybe you get a sharp and strange new tooth that you weren't expecting from a blunder at your spell, or maybe you invert gravity around you. Blunders could also be social blunders. Maybe you are a traveler and you are a kind individual, but as you journey, you become more and more prone to anger due to the journey and due to the stress. The GM could say that your jovial aspect goes down by a couple dice, or you lose it altogether. See what I'm trying to say here? There's lots of diversity and lots of ways you can play the game. It could be heavily focused in combat, social deduction, or a little bit of both. But all encounters could feel like life or death, super fun or silly, and I just like that flexibility. Seriously, there's no game that really has that sort of flexibility that I can think of at the moment. And I'm happy that Distorted Domains sort of satisfies that need. I would love to see how this expands when the game is officially released, because I love me a good social deduction or social based game. I mean, I'm a YouTuber, I like yapping, if it's not already obvious. Secondly, let's talk about the setting. Since this is a Gonzo fantasy, there are a lot of cool settings. The game I played in was an Arco Station, a space station that is orbiting a black hole that's occupied by sentient dinosaurs with no recollection of who built the station. As you can tell, each setting has a number of tables, from problems to existing rooms, that let the facilitator or narrator not just pull something out from the rest of their brain, but really just roll on tables and keep the story going. I think Distorted Domains scratches that itch of my brain and my gaming sensibilities that wants silly games, that wants something that is both full of heart, that is a Gonzo science fantasy. The levels of harm and positive and negative traits can tell an interesting journey of how your character does indeed become a better or worse person over their journey through the domains. But some worlds are more dangerous than others. Some worlds are ruled by god-like cicada humanoids, and the major magic system is powered by chalk. Well, welcome to the hereafter, as stated by the ecological science fantasy role-playing game, Cloud Empress. In it, you play a traveler trying to make sense of this world by thriving, living, and learning, while at the threat and in harmony by the Imago, aka giant cicadas. Yet that is only one piece of the puzzle to the hereafter. Because while Cloud Empress is compatible with Mothership, It's a book about how your characters and the world interact with the vast environmental beauty and horror in it. It is in how the world was unmatched by the ancient people even before the hereafter. They were called torturers. The world burned and these ancient beings saw their ferocity and left the world for more. It left the world in wreckage under the rule of cicadas. Speaking of which, yeah, the world is ruled by giant cicadas. These cicadas grow 30 feet and are flowing with magic. In the summer, they crawl up from the field and forest to satiate their seasonal hunger for bones of the dead and chalk energy. Imago beam with this energy, powered by chalk. While some fear the creatures, others admire their grace, their human-like faces, and how they populate and yield food for the fields and vegetation. Above all else, humanity can only imitate their magic via chalk. And yes, you heard me, chalk. I've mentioned it multiple times. Chalk is the magic that powers this world, yet it is also pollutant. As stated in the book, it sits heavy in the soil, creeping into the grass, the crops, and settling in the bones of humans and imagos alike. Chalk crawls up the food chain, bleaching skeletons and withering bodies, before finding its way to the apex, to the imago. Chalk in this world is everything. It powers the machines of the hereafter, is what magicians, couriers, and sellswords die in dozens for. It is in part why the Cloud Empress may have been kidnapped by Farmingling insurgents. Yes, there are factions as well. The Farminglings and Cloudlings are the two factions in this world. The Farminglings are those who live on the land of the hereafter. They live in the lowland wastes among the teeming nature. Many toil working in the fields, but also share a deep adoration of the land. It has deep power, and thus fuels their food, their water, and their lives. While they respect the chalk, they fear and admire magic users, because of possibly how it imitates the great imagos. Cloudlings, on the other hand, they covet that power. They covet magic. Some even call themselves lordlings. They create titles for themselves so that they can rule over others. Yet, they feed on small birds and are reliant on what is imported or grown in ancient vats or tanks. Where farmlings mind loose love and virility, cloudlings desire honor and empire. And to build an empire, you need resources. And when there are questions of accessing and wanting resources, you can get war, which involves the vessel of an empire, the Cloud Empress, who is missing. So what not a better excuse than to use the missing Empress as an excuse for war? And mind you, that is only scratching the surface of this game's world building. Every aspect in this 60 plus page book is filled to the brim with world building, tables, and practical tools for the players and game master. I can genuinely picture how my character came to be and why they exist in this world. Beyond that, everything feels so tied to the ecology of the world, from the food you eat to the land you stand on, and even the people in the sky. Everything comes back to the land. Everything and everyone, from the fearsome imago to the pack squab, which are the pigeon-like creatures the size of horses, and the humans that toil are reliant on the earth. If there is a game that is entirely deserving of attention based upon its just world building alone, Cloud Empress by Watt is 100% deserving. Moving on are honorable mentions. These are games that I played or ran, but I just don't want to have to write lots of details, and I just want to mention these really awesome games. Cyborg. I ran Cyborg the first time using the module Download Terror. The module is absolutely terrifying in the best way. If you love psychological horror, then this is pure fun, for the wrong reasons. Liminal horror. I played liminal horror for the first time at PAX Unplugged. Specifically, I played A Merry Little Christmas by R. Rook Studio, and I'm still reeling from my time. The game is a D20 system, and you roll underneath your stat. Your stat is created by rolling 3d6, and you roll 1d6 for hit protection. Actually starting play in the game is really fast and really easy. I think what captured me the most was how easily and fast things get deadly and scary while playing. Our characters felt fragile, and better yet, there was the constant question of what you do when you have to make a tough decision. Those difficult decisions can mean saving your own hide versus someone you're connected to. It could be drawing a weapon on someone who you are not sure you can trust. It could even mean doing unthinkable things. The combo of stress mechanics piling up and your stats decreasing and conditions being added to your inventory make for a hauntingly good time as you're managing resources in the survival horror tabletop role-playing game. Seriously, I recommend checking out Liminal Horror and specifically A Merry Little Christmas this holiday season and next holidays afterwards. Finally is Brindlewood Bay. Yet another horror game, but this one is cozy. You play old women who are here to solve mysteries specific to murder related to Brindlewood Bay. I think the most fun for me is just how the mystery is ever changing and how the facilitator can push for negative consequences or for positive consequences depending on your roles. I played over on the TTRPG server in Star, who I've worked with before, and golly, the game was just so much fun. Unrelated. Also, as someone who has survived 2 herring encounters in Star's games, I think my time is coming. Ruby, my lovely fish grandma, will definitely get murked, I think, in the next one. I'm not calling it, but if anyone watching this right now and was there, I'm calling it. And that's some of my honorable mentions. If there are games that you think in 2024 needed to be talked about, let me know down below in the comment section. Last but not least, here are some games that I haven't played yet, but that I've been putting off and I want to. There's obviously Derf, which I mentioned earlier, which is a rules-light dungeon fantasy game. Shiver RPG is a horror game perfect for one-shots. It's more pop culture-y than Liminal Horror or Brindlewood Bay, and I really want that in my array of games. Animon Story is another one. I love Pokemon and Digimon, so this game has been sitting on my periphery for a couple of years now, and I think 2025 is my year to run and or play it. Plus, there's an amazing actual play going on by Quill & Swords that involves Digimon, and it's on Twitch. So I'll have a link to that actual play that I've been watching over here. There's Ligmamon RPG. Yeah, another Pokemon RPG, but I just found this randomly while looking at All Eyes No Games itch.io page, and I just like the name. I think you know why I like the name. No Sacrifice Without Blood. If you like violence and gothic modern horror, then this is perfect. It is about monsters' unavoidable lust for blood and what you are willing to do for it. It's messy and everything I need in a gothic game. Kane RPG. This is literally just Jujutsu Kaisen RPG with awesome art. I'm going to be running this. Battle School. I love mechs, I love sci-fi, and I love the style of this art. Seriously, Battle School has been on my periphery for quite some time, and I'm hoping to run it at least once. Triangle Agency. I actually saw Triangle Agency at PAX Unplugged, but I'd already bought in so many other awesome games, and I was like, yeah, I kind of don't want to spend any more money. But if you like corporate fighting done badass with superpowers / anomalies, then this is going to be perfect for you. Finally is Session Zero System. This is a tool for creating characters for your next game. I found it, yet again, while walking around PAX Unplugged, but I haven't actually played it or used it yet, so I can't really speak on it too in depth. With that in mind, I think Sigma-Gnostic tools are super helpful, and I'm hoping to try this for my next OSR or even horror game. Finally are just the things that I did this year that I don't know where else to put. First off, by the time you've seen this video, I was at PAX Unplugged 2024, and this was my first time being at a TTRPG convention that was focused on tabletop games, card games, and board games. It was very beautiful being in that space because I got the chance to see other nerds that were talking about the things that I cared about. I spent most of my time on Games on Demand, and it was just an absolute blast. It was an absolute pleasure, and I will be going to PAX Unplugged in 2025. Similarly, I went to MomoCon in 2024, and that was just another great experience. I played a lot of DCC there, and I got to get some cool merch. MomoCon wasn't as much of a tabletop convention, but it was still just great to visit. I also got to be on Star's Characters About Stories podcast, and that was just an amazing conversation. I got to talk about Chris Strassman, my lovely, socially isolated, awkward streamer, who may or may not have a ego to him, who's also extremely nervous. I love talking about my characters, and just being on Star Show was an absolute blast. If you're looking for a unique podcast that talks about specifically the characters you haven't played yet, please go check out Characters Out Stories. I'll have a link to the podcast and a link to my episode down below in the description box as well. Next are the servers that I've been a part of that I just want to give a special shout out. TTRPG Academy. Seriously, thank you all for your awesome server on Discord. It has been an absolute wonder supporting it. It's been an absolute wonder talking to all the people on there, and it's just been just really fun to interact with other folks who are interested in non-5e games. Also, I'm happy to yap about my creative process on there. So seriously, if y'all looking for a server to play non-D&D games, especially that's ran by queer and trans or marginalized folk, then this is the server for you. And next is the other server that I love, Historically Black Dice, HBD. I'm a cute buck of y'all. If you're black and you like D&D or tabletop role-playing games, then this is the server for you. I've run lots of games on there. I play lots of games. And for black folk, and specifically for the 5 black folk who probably watch these videos, this server's for you. With that, those are my games, articles, and just things about tabletop role-playing games that I have loved in 2024. This year has been a lot. It's been exhausting, and I'll be honest, the political climate is absolute dog water. It's getting only worse. But every time I come back to the hobby, every time I join a new game, every time I run a new game on Start Playing, every time I'm just in the hobby, I'm reminded that we always have the creativity to create new worlds that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. And I'm just happy to be in this space creating, well, a space for you to enjoy the content and for me to enjoy writing and reading and doing my research. With all that in mind, if you celebrate holidays, happy holidays and happy New Year's. If you want to support my channel, if you want to support my creative work, I'll have my Patreon over here, my coffee over here, and above all else, my itch.io page over here. The least you can do for the holiday season is liking, commenting, and then just telling me what are your plans for 2025 for tabletop role-playing games, or in general. I'd like to know. I'm your average, everyday queer host, D&D enjoyer, OSR nerd, and just lover of everything tabletop role-playing games. Blurty disposition, and I hope you all have an awesome new year.